The scent of wet earth and charred pine clings to the heavy, smoke-stained timber like a shroud, a bitter perfume of survival. Outside, the world has ceased to exist. The sky has collapsed into a churning white void, and the first gale of the great winter claws at the door with the desperation of a dying beast. But inside, the horizon has shrunk to the width of a single room. Here, the universe is defined by the flickering amber glow of the central hearth, where the low, rhythmic crackle of burning peat provides the only heartbeat against the muffled roar of the wasteland beyond the walls. Look closely at the shadows dancing upon the rafters. There, a grandmother's hands, weathered like ancient bark and stained by decades of hearthsoot, move with a quiet, sacred urgency. She does not reach for a sword or a shield to defend her kin. Instead, she presses a damp handful of moss into a hairline fracture in the wattle wall. It is a small gesture, almost invisible, yet it is the difference between a morning of waking and a morning of stone-cold silence. She understands what the sagas often forget, that a kingdom is not won only on the battlefield, but in the shivering quiet of the longhouse, where the wind seeks even the smallest crack to steal the warmth from a child's lungs. This hall is not merely a shelter of wood and stone. It is a living lung. It breathes with the heavy, humid heat of the livestock huddled in the darkness of the far end, their shifting hooves and low, guttural breaths thickening the air. In this narrow space, the boundary between the living and the frozen silence of the gods is held by nothing more than 3 feet of layered turf and the shared, desperate breath of the kin. There is a strange, suffocating sanctity in this closeness, a realization that to survive the north, one must become part of the earth itself, burrowing deep beneath the snow, while the world above turns to glass. As the frost thickens on the iron latch, the firelight catches a glint of silver at the mistress's belt, a heavy key that feels colder with every passing hour. The storm is no longer just a wind. It has become a weight, a physical presence pressing down on the roof tree, testing the spine of the house. And as the grandmother pulls her shawl tighter, staring into the dying embers, she knows that the true test of the longhouse has only just begun. For when the door is finally buried by the drifts, the greatest threat will not be the cold outside, but the silence that begins to grow within.
A single iron key, cold enough to sear the skin, hangs heavy from the mistress's belt, a tether to a world that is rapidly vanishing. She stands by the threshold, her knuckles white as she watches the sky turn the agonizing color of a bruised plum. The horizon is no longer a line, but a throat, swallowing the fjords in a horizontal tide of ice. This is the moment the sagas warn of, when the air itself turns into a whetted blade, seeking any microscopic gap in the stone-weighted thatch to bleed the life from the hearth. To stay here, to remain standing while the heavens collapse, is to understand a sacred geometry of survival. The longhouse does not defy the storm, it invites it to pass over. Like a great upturned ship stranded on a frozen sea, the house bows its back. Its curved walls are not a choice of aesthetics, but a desperate plea for mercy, allowing the blizzard's fury to slide over its timber shoulders rather than catching the wind's jagged teeth. Every groan of the oak is a prayer. Every layer of turf is a shield. As the drifts rise, climbing the walls inch by agonizing inch, the world outside is slowly erased. Soon, the windows are blinded by white, and the heavy doors are sealed by a concrete of frost, until only the smoke hole at the peak gasps for air, like a drowning man reaching for the surface. Driven by the encroaching shadows, the family retreats to the high benches, drawing their knees to their chests as the floor grows treacherous and cold. They sit in a heavy, ritualistic silence, a communion of the fearful. There is no comfort in speech when the roof timbers above them begin to scream, buckling under the impossible weight of a world turning white and dead. They are no longer masters of the land. They are occupants of a tomb that still breathes. In the flickering light, the mistress reaches for the iron key at her hip, her thumb tracing its frozen ridges. It is a useless object now, a reminder of a door that cannot be opened, and a spring that feels 1,000 years away. As the darkness thickens, the silence of the storm begins to seep into their bones, leading them toward a deeper, more hollow question. When the food begins to fail, who will be the first to break the silence?
The rhythmic thud of a loom provides a heartbeat for the shadows, a steady wooden pulse that refuses to surrender to the chaos outside. In the dim corner of the hall, a young girl weaves coarse wool by the dying amber light of a tallow lamp, her fingers moving with the mechanical grace of a ghost. Every pass of the shuttle is a defiance. Beyond the heavy timber door, the blizzard has become a choir of screaming spirits, a white fury that seeks to tear the very breath from the world. But here, within these walls, the air is thick and stagnant, a heavy soup of dried fish, old leather, and the damp, oily musk of 100 huddling sheep. It is a suffocating atmosphere, yet it is the only thing keeping the frost from claiming their blood. In this fortress of the forgotten, there is no fragile glass to shatter, no thin timber to snap beneath the wind's iron fist. The walls are a massive, silent weight, 3 feet of packed earth and dense sod, ancient and unyielding. They hold within their dark density the lingering memory of last summer's sun, a stored warmth that fights a slow, attritional war against the encroaching ice. The girl does not need to look out the smoke hole to know the strength of the storm. She feels it as a low, guttural vibration through the soles of her feet, a shuddering in the floorboards that speaks of a world being erased. It is a reminder that their survival is not a sudden, heroic act, but a slow and patient defiance rooted in the very soil they tilled before the first frost arrived. She pauses for a moment, her hand resting on the rough fibers of the warp, feeling the house groan like a living beast under the mounting snow. There is a terrible intimacy in this confinement, a realization that they are buried alive, yet warm. They have become part of the land's deep subterranean silence, waiting for a dawn that may never come. But as the tallow lamp flickers, threatening to plunge the room into a total sightless dark, she catches the scent of wood smoke drifting from the hearth toward the rafters. It is a trail of gray silk, rising toward the only opening left to the world above, leading her eyes toward the man who sits by the embers, his face a map of scars and ancient, unyielding intent.
A bowl of thin, gray pottage steams in the trembling hands of a man whose face is a map of salt and iron, scarred by the spray of the whale road and the biting winds of 1,000 voyages. He does not eat. Instead, his eyes are fixed upward, watching the undulating curtains of blue-gray smoke trapped beneath the rafters, swirling like the ghosts of fallen kings. The steam from his bowl rises to meet the haze.
An iron
a
sword
tiny
discarded,
tribute to the stagnant,
its sharpness
heavy
useless
air
where survival
that
is
keeps the
measured by
reaper at the
breath.
door. In this half-light, the world beyond the timber has ceased to exist. There is only the bowl, the smoke, and the terrifying realization that his survival no longer depends on his sword, but on the very stillness of his breath. The longhouse does not fight the cold, it swallows it. It is a master of yielding, tempering the murderous bitterness of the north through an ancient, quiet alchemy of communal heat and the insulating embrace of the earth itself. Every beam of oak was hewn from the deep woods with an intimate, reverent knowledge of the forest's hidden strength, joined not by the violence of iron nails, but by the patient pressure of gravity and the wordless wisdom of the ancestors. To look at these walls is to see the ribs of a giant, curved to hold back the sky. Beneath the turf, the heat of the fire is a currency more precious than silver, bartered for by the bodies of men and beasts alike, creating a microcosm where the frost is a myth whispered only by the wind. As the drifting snow finally seals the last of the low entrances, the hall is transformed. It becomes a tomb of golden light, buried beneath a mountain of white silence. The man feels the house settle, a low groan of timber meeting earth, and he understands the trade they have made. The blizzard is no longer the enemy. It has become their final insulating skin, a wall of ice that locks the warmth in even as it locks the world out. But as he watches the tallow drip from a nearby lamp, he begins to see the price of this protection. The storm is the catalyst for a profound, suffocating intimacy, a world where every sigh is heard, every secret is shared, and the mask of the warrior begins to melt away in the damp, holy heat. He turns his gaze toward the shadows where the livestock shift and low, their musk a heavy blanket over the senses. There is a saltiness in the air, the scent of the sea that still clings to his skin, calling to a part of him that wishes to run. But the earth holds him fast, and the silence grows heavier, settling into the marrow of his bones like the winter itself. He wonders, as the fire begins to pale, what happens to the soul when the horizon is reduced to a single flickering flame, and the only path left to walk is the one that leads inward, through the thick, resinous dark of the longhouse.
The bitter, metallic tang of frost vanishes the moment the heavy leather curtain falls, replaced by a wall of heat so thick it feels like a physical embrace. It is a suffocating, holy warmth, born from the central hearth and the desperate proximity of life. Here, beneath the soot-blackened ribs of the hall, time loses its sharp edge. Days and nights dissolve into a singular, rhythmic endurance, measured no longer by the sun, which has been murdered by the clouds, but by the slow, agonizing consumption of the woodpile and the steady, wet pulse of the cattle huddled in the byre. In this dim, subterranean world, the architecture is not merely stone and timber, it is a living organism. The walls, layered with thick, damp slabs of peat, act as a silent sponge for the heat, soaking up the radiance of the fire and the feverish breath of the living. To press one's palm against the sod is to feel the vibration of the storm through the earth, but also the low, rhythmic lowing of beasts at the far end of the hall. These animals are the invisible insulation of the poor, their massive, steaming bodies providing a furnace that no hearth could match. It is a world of primal textures, the scratch of rough, unwashed wool against the skin, the slick feel of polished bone needles, and the pungent, greasy residue of seal oil lamps that cast flickering shadows against the rafters. There is a profound, wordless unity in this confinement. The physical architecture of the longhouse is inseparable from the spiritual architecture of the clan. If one beam fails, the roof collapses on all. If the fire dies, the blood of the entire lineage begins to slow. Every person, from the elder clutching a fur robe to the child sleeping near the embers, is a vital brick in this fortress of flesh and earth. They are the warmth that the cold seeks to steal, a collective spark huddling in the belly of the world. But as the smoke thickens, stinging eyes and clouding the mind, a new kind of fragility emerges. The air is growing thin. Outside, the ice continues to weave its delicate, deadly lace upon the threshold, waiting for the one moment of weakness that will turn this sanctuary into a tomb.
Ice crystals form a delicate, deadly lace upon the outer threshold, a silent invasion of frost creeping across the timber, as if testing the resolve of the living. It is a haunting sight, the frozen fingers of the north reaching for the latch. Yet, only a foot away, the air undergoes a violent transformation. It becomes a thick, humid curtain, heavy with the sharp salt of hanging joints of meat and the deep animal musk of a dozen souls entwined in sleep. This thin line of wood and iron is the only thing separating the absolute zero of the void from the feverish heat of a lineage. To cross this threshold is to step out of the jaws of a predator and into the belly of a protector. To walk the length of the longhouse is to travel through a physical hierarchy of survival. At the far ends, near the low porches, the air remains thin and biting, a reminder of the winter's proximity. But as you move toward the center, the temperature rises in sweltering waves toward the communal heart, the hearth, where the fire never truly dies. This architecture is not merely a construction of hands. It is a prayer whispered in stone and turf, a petition to the earth to hold fast. It was designed with the humility of the tall grass, built to bend and groan beneath the crushing weight of the sky, without ever snapping. Each joint is supple, each wall a massive absorbing lung that takes the blow of the gale and turns it into a sigh. As the rafters creak and wail like the hull of a ship lost in the troughs of a black sea, a strange claustrophobic peace settles over the inhabitants. There is no more running, there is no more work to be done. They find a dark comfort in the realization that the very snow burying them, piling up until it covers the eaves, has become their final layer of warmth against the indifferent stars. The blizzard has transformed from a monster into a blanket of ice, sealing them into a world where the only reality is the person breathing beside them. But as the firelight catches a stray mote of dust rising toward the ceiling, the eye is drawn upward, past the smoke in the timber, toward the one narrow shard of light that remains, the smoke hole, where the ancient world still watches and waits.
A single pale shard of light pierces the gloom from the smoke hole high above, catching the dust motes as they dance in a frantic golden swirl over the central fire. It is a haunting, lonely beam, the only clock left in a world where the sun has been murdered by the storm. Outside, the celestial cycles of day and night have collapsed into a singular, howling gray. But here, the passage of time is measured only by the slow descent of the ash and the lengthening of shadows against the curved oak. This is the art of the endurance, a dwelling built low and heavy to the ground, mimicking the burial mounds of the ancestors, as if the living must first learn to inhabit the earth before they are finally returned to it. The air is thick, a visceral soup of survival. The heavy, resinous scent of pine sap fills the lungs, a bleeding fragrance squeezed from the wood by the heat of the hearth. It serves as a constant, aromatic reminder of the primordial forests that sacrificed their tallest, straightest sons to hold up this soot-stained ceiling. Every pillar is a witness, every crossbeam a silent guardian that carries the weight of 1,000 winters upon its shoulders. There is a terrifying beauty in this architecture, a realization that the house is not merely a box of wood, but a fortress of memory and biological heat, a place where the barrier between the quick and the dead is as thin as a layer of dried peat. As the wind howls a final, desperate note against the sod-packed eaves, shaking the very foundation of the hall, a father leans close to his son. His hand, calloused and scarred by the axe, rests heavily on the boy's shoulder. His voice is a low, subterranean rumble that mimics the ancient, unyielding strength of the timber surrounding them. He does not speak of the cold, nor of the hunger that gnaws at the edges of their bellies. Instead, he whispers of the roots, of how the tree survives the gale not by standing tall, but by holding fast to what lies beneath. As the fire pops, casting a sudden spray of sparks toward the dark rafters, we realize that the longhouse was never just a building. It was a vessel carrying the flickering flame of a people through a sea of ice, toward a dawn they had to believe was coming, even if they would never see it.